So I'm here to talk about failure, and there's an important reason why, and that is, invention requires failure. Innovation requires failure, and we innovate. That's what we do in software. We make hard things easy, we create new industries, we disrupt old industries, we find new efficient ways of doing things. We invent, we innovate. And it's hard to do something new perfectly the first time. And if you can, it's probably not that novel, right? We have to make mistakes in order to succeed. And you can believe me, or you can believe this guy, Albert Einstein, who said, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new, right? So let's, for the next 29 minutes, please accept this premise, right? You need to fail in order to innovate. And if you can accept that premise, the question is, how do you deal with that inevitable failure? Because the failure's coming, it's gonna happen. So it's not about avoiding it, it's about how you use it and how you leverage it. I think about this in terms of creating a fail-safe environment. Now, a long time ago in the software industry, when we talked about being fail-safe, we talked about failure avoidance. We were doing things like trying to prove our code, prove that it would always work. We don't talk about that anymore, partially because we were never able to achieve it. I think if you think about it, you can understand why we can't do that anymore, but we never really could. So now it's about, I think, more about failing smart. Now, as Mary said, before I was at Avvo, I was at Spotify. Spotify was a company that was really good at creating a fail-safe environment. And there we talked about it as minimizing the blast radius. And this is actually a quote from Michael Kranz. He's the chief architect at Spotify. And this was, something he and we were in a Slack conversation, and he actually said this. And I loved it so much, I asked if I could steal it for this talk. We want to be an internal combustion engine, not a fuel-air bomb. Many small controlled explosions propelling us in a generally okay direction, not a huge blast leveling half the city. The reason why I like this analogy is this idea of small controlled explosions pushing us forward, because that's what failure can be if you handle failure well. How do you get those small controlled explosions? Well, one way is you fail fast, right? You find the fastest, easiest path to learn, because that's what failure is. Failure is an opportunity to learn if you use it. And we can learn fast today, but we weren't always able to learn as fast. How many of you do not recognize Clippy or know of the Office Assistant? No one. Everyone knows this. The reason is, and by the way, I've met many of you yesterday. Many of you are too young to have ever seen it, because Microsoft stopped shipping it a long time ago. But you know it because this is a failure that was so massive, it crossed out of our industry and became part of popular culture. Like, you can find people that have never used a computer that know Clippy is horrible and annoying to you. But the thing about this is, it's easy to think, well, what's wrong with these people that made this feature? They obviously didn't know what they were doing. But the fact of the matter is, I worked at Microsoft when this was being developed. I didn't work on this project, but but I knew lots of people who did. I was very friendly with a lot of the folks on that team. These were incredibly intelligent people, right? Office is still one of the most successful software products of all time, easily. And this was Office at its height of popularity. This was an incredibly hard team to join at Microsoft, a very selective team. I was working at Microsoft Research at the time. Some of my peers with multiple PhDs from highly accredited universities spent a lot of time trying to make this project work. And they got it wrong in an extremely bad way. But it wasn't because the team was bad, it wasn't because the technology was bad, it was because they couldn't figure out that they were going to get it wrong because of the way we wrote software then. So for those of you, the very few of you were working back then, but this is what software was like back in the mid-90s. Especially for a product like Office. Microsoft would actually license all the CD and DVD capability, manufacturing capability of every plant in the world basically years in advance. And it had to be years in advance because they needed all of it simultaneously. So you're a developer. I was a developer at Microsoft. You know in advance, you know 2 years, the exact date you have to be done because that's when all the plants in the world are waiting for your software. So you're typing. You're sitting in Redmond typing. Just trying to get it done because, of course, we did waterfall back then, so you knew all the features. You just had to get them done in time. And you were working, and then you hit that golden master date 2 years in advance, or at 2 years of working. Maybe you had a little bit of time to do some user research, but user research wasn't as advanced as it is now. So then at that GM date, if you ever wonder what that date means, golden master, the master discs were produced. They were sent to the plants. Those plants started producing plastic and foil discs, which were put into cases, which were put into boxes, which were put into bigger boxes, which were put onto pallets, which were put onto trucks, which were taken to trains and boats, which were then taken off and put onto trucks again, taken to warehouses, unloaded from the trucks, sat on the warehouse, put into a new truck, driven to a store. You would drive your car to the store. You would go to the shelf if the software was in stock. You would take the discs, you would buy them at a register, you would drive them home, and then you would spend an afternoon or an actual complete day installing the software by putting one disk at a time into your computer. That's how we wrote and distributed software back then. So it was literal years from the concept to the time your customers saw it. Today, it's very different. It's a totally different world. You can ship your website every time you hit save in your editor if you really want to do it that way. You can ship your Android app every day. You can ship your iOS app multiple times a month. You can get your ideas to your customers extremely fast, much faster than we used to. So there's no real excuse anymore to wait and have this big failure instead of the small one. Now, TJ Watson, early CEO of IBM, said, if you want to increase your success rate, double your failure rate. So if it takes you multiple years to fail, you may never succeed, right? And IBM's especially interesting because, as I said, he's an early CEO. This is when IBM was making the big iron, right? It took a long time. And I actually worked at IBM before I worked at Microsoft. A long time ago, maybe a couple longs in there as well. And this is the thing, I worked on a project at a research lab at IBM, and as we reached the end of the project, we found out that there were 2 other labs working on the exact same project that we had no idea about. And we were, of course, pretty upset because we could have been sharing our research and working much more efficiently. But only later did I realize this wasn't some massive corporate bumbling. This was by design, because if it took too long to fail, so IBM failed in parallel instead of failing serially, so it could increase its failure rate. Now, important part of this creating a fail-safe environment, is the culture that you build and how you handle failure. So Nick talked about this a little bit yesterday, punishing failure. Don't punish failure. And we punish failure in sort of obvious ways, like your team failed, we're firing your team. We also fail and punish failure in a lot of subtle ways, like if you've ever been part of the less profitable product in a multi-product suite, as I have, you've maybe heard the teams that make the money making fun of the teams that don't make the money, which I have. That's punishing failure as well, because the teams not making the money are the ones that will make the bigger money, hopefully, someday. That doesn't mean there is no accountability, right? Failure is the opportunity to learn. If you don't learn from your failure, then you're just wasting time. So don't punish failure, but punish not learning from failure, because then you're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Because, as I said, failure is an opportunity to learn if you take it. And it's not pleasant, it's not fun, right? It doesn't feel good to dwell on your mistakes, to kind of wallow in your failure. But it can teach you so much if you're willing to spend the time, and teach you about lots of different things. It tells you about your process. This release is so buggy, what happened? Well, the test team was working on this other feature, and then because they kind of shifted on late, and actually the test automation caught the issues, but it's been so flaky lately that nobody's paying attention anymore. That's a failure process. It could be your team, and when I say your team, I don't mean your team's not good. I mean, you maybe took on a technology from some other team that you didn't know, and you didn't have time to get the skill set into your team, either by borrowing somebody or learning it yourselves. It could be your perception of your customers. So we all create myths of who our customers are. Hopefully those myths are actually informed by good things like user research and reading forums and Twitter and App Store reviews and meeting them in person. But the fact is, you can't know perfectly the souls of every one of your customers, so you make a myth about who they are. And that myth is processed through your own biases. And that's who you're designing your software for, who may or may not be your actual users. But the thing is, even if you could perfectly know all of your customers today, it's going to change tomorrow because you're going to get new ones. And those new ones are coming with completely fresh eyes to your software. So even if you know them today, you're not going to know them tomorrow. You're understanding your product. We all understand our products because we're making our products. But the thing is that we write software to solve problems. Our customers are using our software to solve problems. It's not always the case that those two problems are the same problems. It just so happens that one of your customers has a problem. They happen to be able to solve it with your software. That's not what you're writing your software for. And then what happens, you change your software because you're solving a different problem and you break them. That happens all the time. And of course, yourself. It's always an opportunity to learn how you can be better. Extract the lessons. Take the time. It's painful, it gets easier, but it's worth it. Do retrospectives for everything. If you come to Spotify or now Avvo, we do retrospectives for everything. Not just the normal team ones, of course we do those as part of our ceremonies, but on every project, success or failure. Because if we did it only on successes, or only on failures, like postmortems, as we used to do, which were all about mitigation and honestly assigning blame to some other team, then we would be essentially punishing failure in a subtle way. So instead we do them for every project, because even the most successful projects have mistakes in them, things you could do better next time. And when you do these retrospectives, don't do it on the current project, right? Don't figure out what we specifically screwed up on this project. Sure, do that, but with an eye towards the next one, not just towards this one. Learn from it and catalog those learnings. Create a shared repository for your whole company. All of them go in that place so that everyone can learn from everyone else. And that one's tough. That's a tough thing to do, right? Because now, essentially, you're putting your team's laundry out for display. But it helps create a culture if everyone's willing to do that, and that lets you learn from others as well. It may feel good from a sort of schadenfreude way if this team next door to yours fails on the same thing you failed on, because it makes you feel better that it wasn't just your team, but it doesn't do anything for your company. So there's not a lot of value there. Failures hidden or forgotten, our failures are bound to be repeated. Again, Spotify was quite good at this. This is a fail wall from one of the squads at Spotify. This was a team that this wasn't facing like an internal back wall or hidden. This was facing a walkway that everyone walked past to get in and off the floor. This was a team that was proud of what they'd learned from the mistakes that they'd made, and were so proud of it that they were very happy to show everybody the things that they were learning. And this shared repository doesn't have to be anything special. You don't need to build software to do it or buy software. It can just be a shared drive or a shared folder in Google that everybody puts their retrospectives in. Not a lot of work to do that. Bob Sutton, management professor. The most creative people in companies don't have lower failure rates. They fail faster and cheaper. and they perhaps learn more from their setbacks than their competitors. We're all innovating, all of us, and we're all failing all the time. So if you can do more with your failure, if you can learn more from your failure than companies in your market, you can actually use that to succeed. Another idea around this, making these small controlled explosions, is making failure safer. Minimizing the cost of failure, right? Because that's what hurts you in the end, those big failures, those fuel air bombs. This is something you may have seen before, a framework for building new features or products based on lean thinking. Think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. The vertical axis here is investment. That investment could be people's time, that could be opportunity cost, that could be literally pounds, whatever you want, it's generalized. That x-axis is time. So the idea is this. You're coming back from lunch with some of your coworkers, and you have an idea for a new feature. You go, oh, that seems pretty cool. Let's talk to the product manager about it. Get back to work, you talk to the product manager about it. She says, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Let's try it. Let's think about it. So maybe you, the product manager or designer, sit around, do some paper prototyping, some small code prototypes, play with the idea. You're not investing a lot, part-time of a few people. But now it seems like this is a good idea. Let's do this for real. Now the curve goes up pretty quick because the whole team's getting involved. And you want to reduce that investment, reduce that area. So what do? You don't build the full feature, you build an MVP. You want to prove the hypothesis that you have. So you want to get it to your customers as quickly as possible. And now it's ready to ship. And in a lot of companies, shipping is a binary thing. You haven't shipped and now you've shipped. Instead, think about it like this. You roll out everything, right? But especially new things. Because this is where you start to put your ideas in front of your customers and you get real feedback from the people who use your product. So you roll it out. Roll it out to a small percentage. Does it look good? Is it proving the hypothesis? Yes. Roll out further. No. Now you have a decision. Was this really a bad idea that we thought was a good idea? Or is it still, we think it's a good idea, we just didn't do it right, let's try some other things. And you can work in that space for a little while and figure it out, and then finish. The thing is that until you ship to 100%, you're not really getting any return on all this work you've put in. No return on your investment. And you're trying to minimize this area under the curve. But now it's shipped. It's shipped to 100%, this MVP idea. But it's the MVP idea. It's not the real full idea that you had. So now you enter into essentially a loop of repeating this process in smaller and smaller increments as you finish out the idea. And you notice that investment never goes to zero, right? It never will. Because once something's in your product, you got to support it forever. New library comes out, breaks the feature. New operating system change breaks the feature. You have a new feature that you want to put in, and now it's kind of, this old feature is kind of in that space that you want to really put the new thing in. It's always going to cost you, so don't add it in if it's neutral. Only add it in if it's actually adding to the product. But the cool part about this is that there's many, many ways to actually realize if you've made a mistake, if you have a failure through this process. These are just some ways that you can test at every stage here and find your failure quick, fail fast. Now, I've talked about failures I've been tangentially associated with. I'm going to talk about my biggest failure the last few years. I've had some failures at Avvo, but not this big. So this is a better story for the moment. I apologize for Sean, who works at Spotify, is sitting in the audience. But this wasn't her fault, this was mine. How many of you heard of Spotify now? Okay, wow, okay. That's actually more than most audiences I've given this talk. Okay, so, all right, you know what I'm talking about then. So, for those who don't, I'll tell you a little bit about it. In the fall of 2014, I was working at Spotify, running a tribe, and we knew Apple Music was coming out. We knew more or less when. We had very good competitive intelligence. And we were worried about it because we didn't know what they were going to do. So we wanted to have a very clear statement that we are the innovators in this space. This is our space, Apple. You're not going to just take it away from us. So we wanted to have a major press event right before the Apple launch. So it was fall of 2014. We had a bunch of ideas in think it stages. We had some other stuff that was kind of percolating, not quite at the think it stage yet, just ideas that were floating around. We found a narrative to unify all these things that were being thought through, and that what narrative was Spotify Now. The idea is that anytime you launch the app, you would find the exact right content to entertain you. That was the idea. So Spotify was extremely good at failing in public and failing with its users, but we wanted this major press event. We wanted a big event. So we couldn't really do that because the press was watching every move we made. And we knew we had the press in our beta forums, and oftentimes we would kind of try a feature, and the press would end up in one of the cohorts. So, and then it'd get reported on while we were still kind of thinking through it. So we decided, well, no, we have to do this one in secret. We're going to do this in secret. And we're using it of course we're using it in the company. We're trying it out every day. And we're starting to feel, several months into the development, as we're using it, we're starting to feel this doesn't feel great. Like we were hoping for something really earth-shattering, and this doesn't really feel like a great set of features. So we were able to convince the product and marketing team to let us try it. By the way, I actually forgot to say this. I was the road manager for development. So this was the largest project that Spotify ever did. Actually, I don't think they've done a bigger one since. This was several hundred developers. This was outside of development, licensing, marketing, business development. This was another several hundred people. This was a lot of people. A significant percentage of the company was working on this. So, and I had peers in product and design that we were all road managing this together. So we were able to convince everybody, let's do a little test. We'll do a test where we hope no one will find out about it. We picked a cohort of users, a small cohort of users in New Zealand. We were lucky, none of them turned out to be press. Was very lucky. And we tested a subset of the features. And we got some unexpected results. Because what we saw was a 6% increase in retention. Now, for a subscription product like Spotify, retention is everything, right? That's your lifetime value. So a 6% increase was this was a business case that they would teach in business school if we actually got this, because at the scale of a product like Spotify, any kind of full-digit increase in any of the core metrics is insane. It's very, very difficult to do, and here we had a 6% increase. So all doubt was gone. We have done it. We are going to be amazing. This is going to be awesome. We're ready, full speed ahead. At this point, we're almost ready to release. We booked the press event because we were really confident now this is going to be awesome. The day of the press event happened. Senior company leadership's on stage in New York with all the DJs and bands and famous people. We're in Stockholm on stage with the developers and all the folks who did the work. And we're watching all together, having a party, drinking champagne. They make the announcement, and we flip the switch. We release the feature to 1% of users in the UK, the US, Sweden, and Germany, our top 4 markets. And then we wait. And I'm super excited. I'm really excited because I can't wait. This is going to be amazing. This is going to make my career, the highlight of my career. And every day I'm going to the analysts, I'm saying, how's it looking? How's it looking? And at first they're like, hey, we don't have nearly enough data. Don't worry about it. Come back in a few days. Okay, come back in a few days. What does it look like? Well, we're getting some data in, but it's really early. Don't worry about it. Come back in a few days. And then come back in a few days. Yeah, it's not looking what we thought, but don't worry, we haven't reached statistical significance yet. So, it could be, don't worry about it. Come back finally. yeah, this is not what we thought. Instead of getting that 6% that we'd hoped for, we didn't get 6%, we didn't get 4%, we didn't get 2%, we got negative 1%. And now we have a real problem, because we just told the world about these features. This was blog posts and articles and news features, all this great innovation coming from Spotify, and we can't give it to our users because it will actually make them quit the product. We will lose users if we ship this to them. Now we have a problem, because we also failed big, which we didn't know how to, we knew how to do now, but which we really didn't like to do, and we tried really hard not to. So not only did we fail, but we failed in such a way that we didn't know how we failed, because we'd failed so big. This started a not fun late spring, summer, fall for my team, because what we had to do is just keep experimenting now. The stuff we would have done before with our customers, we had to do after releasing with this same cohort of users. Of course, we had to keep adding new ones in because we were losing them. Try to figure out what we'd done wrong. And this was many months. And along the way, we learned problems with our processes. We learned myths about our own product, myths about our users. We learned all of those things on this process. But, and by the way, eventually, like if you use Spotify, you know, like, so some of the features are video, podcasts, running, party. These are all features that are in the product today. But, you know, we were able to ship. We had a modest, you know, under 1% retention increase with the features, so we shipped them eventually. But along the way, these learnings actually have been what has catapulted a lot of Spotify's growth since. This learning helped influence Discover Weekly, Release Radar, Daily Mix, all the kind of features that have been helping Spotify grow significantly since. So the learning was valuable. It would have been more valuable if we'd done it first, but at least we got it done. And I'm sure you're curious. One of the things we learned along the way was we found a bug in our A/B testing system. That was part of our process problems. We'd sent two tests to the same cohort of users. One test was Spotify Now. The other test turned off advertising in our free product. Because there was a team that was trying to establish a baseline of what that would look like. And the answer is that would increase retention by 7%. To Spotify's culture of learning from failure, I was not fired, my peers were not fired. In fact, we were supported, and we were later rewarded for what we'd done and how we'd handled this. And that speaks very strongly to what's possible with a culture of learning from failure, because that is what's taken Spotify to a massive growth curve over the last year and a half or longer. I'm going to leave you with a final thought. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Oh, sorry. Oh, not what I wanted to do. There we go. So this is my Twitter. I'm here all day. If you have questions, please, and you don't get a chance to talk to me, you can tweet them at me. Thank you very much.